We all should be very proud of the fact that one of the highest trained units in the country responding to disasters at a moment's notice is based right here in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm Dale Johnson. Thanks a lot for joining us today on Lincoln Fire and Rescue. We go on a training trip today with Nebraska Task Force 1, Urban Search and Rescue, based here in Lincoln. The location is Crisis City, Kansas, for a 36-hour exercise. Taking us on the October 4th and 5th trip, a realistic full-scale exercise, is LFR Battalion Chief Brad Thavenet. Brad, thank you very much for going along.
Thanks for having me today, Dale.
So it's early October, a couple of days in October, just outside of Salina, Kansas. A lot of experts are watching other skilled experts carry out search and rescue operations through rubble, simulated to be the aftermath of an F5 tornado. That's the scenario you're pulling up to, correct?
That was the scenario, and we're all familiar with tornado activity here, in Lincoln in the Midwest. And so, sitting in Tornado Alley, the scenario for this joint training exercise between Nebraska's task force and Missouri's task force, among a whole host of others, was an F5 tornado hitting the city of Salina, Kansas, affecting a hospital, apartment complex, blowing some railroad cars off the railroad tracks that were containing some hazardous chemicals and materials, as well as affecting just a campground and the things that go on a day-to-day October weekend in the middle of the Midwest, if you will. So that was the scenario that was set up for both task forces to tackle when they got boots on the ground, were called in, not unlike we would be called into any disaster like Moore, Oklahoma, last year about this particular time when a tornado did touch down there.
Dissect the Urban Search and Rescue team. Tell viewers the components and the experts in this team.
It is a self-contained city, if you will, self-sufficient for 72 hours. The task force is made up of a multitude of disciplines, but within those disciplines, we have our own medical cache where we are taking civilian doctors as well as medical specialists. We take civilian heavy equipment operators that run our crane operations. We will take some civilian structural engineers. They'll do a lot of the structural analysis to say what needs shored up, where we can go, what we can't. They'll do some damage assessment and stuff kind of for us. We take some civilian communication operators. And then on the department side, where they're mostly department members from either Lincoln, Omaha, and some Papillion, are our rescue specialists, which are a lot of the hands-on firefighters, the hazmat specialists, most of the command staff, the water rescue folks that are embedded in there as a secondary discipline. Some of our canine handlers, we have one that is on the fire department as well, and then the rest are all civilian from the outside world that comes in. But within all those disciplines, we are a self-contained city where we don't require resources from an area that we would go to assist. So when we show up to assist at a catastrophic event, we're not tapping or relying on resources from an already tapped out city, if you will. So we'll bring our own water, our own food, our own bedding supplies, our own tents, shower facilities, sink facilities, hand washing, MREs, to eat, the old military rations, if you will, meals ready to eat. We have pallets of those. And so we're not asking anything for the first 36 to 72 hours, if you will, that we can draw then, that we can actually go to work without affecting them, and we can be affecting or making a difference in a positive manner as opposed to maybe a negative manner.
How many states involved in the Crisis City exercise?
In the Crisis City exercise, Nebraska's task force was participants, 80 members from our task force. Another 80 from Missouri's task force met there. From the federal FEMA side, they sent their incident support team was there. That's who the task force meshed with between them and the local jurisdiction, as well as some of the hazardous materials equipment that is kind of staged in one location throughout the country showed up from Colorado. Some other equipment showed up from Texas. Communications equipment showed up from the National Geospatial folks. And so all those players, Missouri brought in a National Guard unit. They airlifted themselves in because they had an extended drive time. So there was an airlift component of this exercise. And so all those players were taking place on what is called Crisis City outside of Salina. Almost in the middle of a cornfield pops up a training facility that the military uses for bombing runs around it, arterial, firearms, shooting ranges and that, and then a training ground for urban and disaster warfare.
Before we talk more about Crisis City, I want to make sure that the community realizes the value of the USAR team. This is an effort that began years ago. There are standards to meet, and as a result of keeping these standards up, Lincoln gets equipment, LFR gets equipment based here. You get to keep it here and use it here, as long as you keep up the skills and the requirements and the training, and that's why this exercise
that was
took place.
the genesis of the exercise, is we need to meet mandated standards from Homeland Security and the FEMA side to be able to receive the funding to provide for the program and house the program here in Lincoln. And so holding these exercises, participating in these exercises, we prove that we meet those rescue standards from a deployment module, which is getting out the door, getting on location, doing the evolutions that were put before us from a command perspective, a demobilize and get everybody back safely, efficiently, and effectively. All those are evaluated by third-party evaluators if you were to see if you met the criteria to continue to operate as a team. And it is an outstanding asset to have here in Lincoln and be able to call upon not only within the city, but the state as well if need be. If the viewers remember, earlier this year back in February when it was fairly cold, the industrial nutrition explosion in Omaha. A component of the task force went to assist with Omaha Fire in recovering those two individuals because of the specialized equipment that is housed in the task force cache of equipment isn't something you would normally have on a day-to-day fire apparatus on the street. So we provided the equipment. Omaha Fire Department already had individuals on the task force. They were skilled at operating it. We just brought a couple more skilled folks to be able to rotate through work cycles and use that asset in state as well as other times throughout the past 10 years within the state.
See, I didn't realize that, Brad. I thought the call came from the feds. But you can use USAR within a state or a region?
That particular, you'll call to your local emergency management. In that case, that's what Omaha did, called their local emergency manager, went to the state's emergency management, and then back down to the task force. And we're allowed to be used in that capacity. We just let the federal government know that for a period of time we're out of service because we're tending to something local. And then once we get mitigate that incident there, put everything back together, we're deployable on the federal level then as well.
Did members of the team know what they were approaching? Did you know it was an F5 tornado damage? Did you know anything about Crisis City's scenario?
The only folks that knew what was ahead of them down there was the controller evaluators. Outside of the 80 task force member going, we put together a cadre of controllers and evaluators that actually set the props up, that staged the whole scenario to keep everybody actively engaged for a 36-hour period from the briefings they would go to, the hazardous material incident, which had some live radiation like you would have in a hospital around an MRI lab or something, so that was staged by the hazardous materials controllers, and then they evaluated. So all those were put together in a giant game plan, if you will, not unlike Coach Pelini does on a Saturday. As a game plan, that goes there, but the actual members that are doing do the work, it's totally foreign to them until the call came to said this is where they knew where they were going. They did not know what the scenario were or the multitude of scenarios or injects that we could have if something is going very well, we can slow it down, or if it's not going too well, we can kind of cut back on the amount of problems that we're going to throw at them for them to solve while they're out there.
You mentioned hazmat in the hospital, collapse radiation and the like. Set up this interview with David Kirchhofer. He's from Omaha, and he's a hazardous materials expert.
Yep. Dave was one of our hazardous materials. He's a hazmat team manager on the task force, which there's two of them. And within that hazmat team manager, he has a cadre of hazmat specialists underneath him that kind of do the worker bees. So Nebraska was tasked with the radiological within the hospital. There's a report that the locals did not have the hospital. They have a built-up city at Crisis City, kind of a Connex box city that looks like door-to-door neighborhood, and so they utilized that as a hospital setting. And so the hazmat folks had to get out there, hazardous materials monitors, look for radiation, chemicals that you may find in a hospital, power that was still on or not, and then go address if there were any victims there or around there. Within the scenario, we did have live victims participating as some actors as well as just some training mannequins that were around. And they were doing assessment around live radiological isotopes, in a training scenario, as well as at the same time there was a rail car that blew off its tracks, which they have laying on its side with a hole in it that had a fluid leaking out of it that needed to be contained. And was there vapor from that going to affect the city of Salina, affect anywhere else? And so they were kind of running different setups at the same time to kind of test their critical thinking skills of which needs mitigated first. Do we have the resources to attempt to do this, or do we need to go to the hospital and deal with the leaking fluid and vapor cloud later? Or assign another task force like Missouri and Nebraska working together as one giant task force of 160 folks to split the workload up and attack it that way.
Hazardous materials specialist David Kirschhofer from Omaha.
Our job as the hazmat team was we were sent to a hospital operation after a tornado in which there was possibly chemicals leak. There was also a radiation leak or possible radiation contamination that had occurred post this. And so our operation focus was to be able to get our rescue guys in there to start the rescue operation. But before we can do that, we have to assess, one, how bad is the radiation, how bad is the possible contamination, spills of hazardous materials, things of that nature. And as Nebraska Task Force 1, we're able to go in and identify what is possibly leaked out, what hazards we have to work with, and then to basically isolate, contain it, make it safe for our guys to go in and work. At the same time, Nebraska Task Force 1 is very capable of going in to an environment such as this in full protective gear in order to do these rescue operations. Behind this is a very good, capable hazmat team that sets up a decon line, that identifies what suits they're going to need to wear, what respiratory protection that they're going to need. And by doing all these things and working with medical and working with our task force leaders and everyone that's involved with the team, is get this good team approach to whereby we're able to effectively rescue these people and do this operation. One, keeping in mind the most important aspect is our own safety and the safety of the people we're trying to rescue.
Hazardous materials, obviously a point of emphasis in an exercise like this. Inevitably, or at least potentially, I won't say inevitably, but potentially someone could get some of that hazardous material on them. And even if they haven't, as a precaution, there needs to be a decontamination step.
Absolutely. So everybody that works in what we call the hot zone, which is down in the immediate vicinity of the hazardous material, whether it be the rail car, chemical, or the radiation, if they got any substance on them, regardless, dirty or not, they would come through what kind of looks like an open-ended tent. But if you will, as you start at the entrance point and end at the other end, it's not unlike walking through a car wash. You're going to get kind of soap and water scrubbed down, sprayed water over you, get all that heavy particulate off that is there, contaminated, as well as get monitored throughout. And when you come out the other end, there's a team of another hazmat specialists that are monitoring to make sure you're still, may not have anything else on you and need to go back through again, or they will then assist you with starting to dress down properly, where you kind of roll that garment up so it's easy to dispose of. It doesn't contaminate your undergarments, your clothes underneath, or the person that is assisting you taking that off. So everybody working in a hot zone will waltz right through the decontamination corridor, decontamination tents, get all the heavy particulates and matter off, be monitored on the outside before they're dressed down, and then again monitored for their vitals, their health from being in an encapsulated suit or doing strenuous work before they're actually returned back into service.
Canines play an important role, don't they?
Canines do. Canines are, everybody's in love with canines and the dogs because they do outstanding and awesome work. So within the confines of Crisis City is a giant rubble pile, very elaborate rubble pile with slabs of concrete, culverts, you name it. They kind of simulate a parking garage collapse with a building collapse and just twisted concrete street and metal. One thing nice about Crisis City is there's entrance and egress for live training actors to go inside and pretend to be trapped in there and let the canines go and try to locate them. So you'll see some canines walking on top of the concrete rubble piles with their handlers, trying to detect live victims that are underneath. When they did detect a live victim, some of the search component with the high-tech search cameras that the task force carries may begin to snake their way or search through some of the rubble to detect whether it's acoustic listening devices, cameras that kind of fish down where they can take some video feed that is going down, through the layers of rock and rubble. If they locate a victim that way, they'll move the live victim out, put a training mannequin in. Now the canines portion is done, and the rescue specialists will now start to stabilize that rubble pile as best they can until it meets the needs of the engineer, lift slabs off in conjunction with the heavy equipment and crane operators that we bring. So they will drill holes, put attachment points, sling them up, chain them up, move them off the side, and slowly start to delayer or cut concrete or get through it, stabilize it so they can get down to a victim and then, in essence, extricate the victim out, or send a medical component down through a little hole they may have created to begin to provide any sort of medical care to the victim before they actually bring them out, or if they need to make a hole wider, depending on what is determined at the time by the rescue manager.
Brad, tell listeners about the exercise and the special skills needed in order to work a scenario at a lake. In this particular exercise, the tornado also damaged areas around a campsite.
Yep. Some of the concerns in using different, in trying to get some interagency training is Kansas's Department of Natural Resources, which is their kind of equivalent of Game and Parks for us here in Nebraska, wanted to know how would they operate if they had a tornado hit their lake or out at the campground at the lake. So that kind of got the wheels turning, is let's incorporate some of that. We have a wide area search component where we have a multitude of GPS equipment that is done for tracking and setting waypoints and locating stuff, gridding off, not like what we were tasked to do in Boulder when the task force went to the Boulder floods last year. So we used the lake scenario because we bring with us a boat component, a water component with the task force. We have 4 flat bottom boats. We have water rescue equipment. 14 water rescue technicians are certified, and so they go. So they wanted to incorporate that, so they put a host of training mannequins and live victims as well as domestic animals, because after Katrina and Rita had hit down in New Orleans, you could not leave somebody's pet behind because they found out that pet owners did not want to leave their pet behind and leave their home. They'd rather stay with their pet than be rescued. So a directive from our program office was you will now take their domestic pets with them. So we even had animals, and how would you handle an animal in a flat bottom boat that's not really used to being on water, and we bring our own dog kennels to be able to capture them, our own PFDs for the victims. So we set that in place over there and used one of the Chinook helicopters that Missouri brought in to transport a component of Nebraska and Missouri combined, the 55 miles over to the lake, where they had staged that, and they began to work water operations on some of the islands, on some of the far sides where they had staged them, and began gridding off the what they were told was a campground outside the parking lot to locate missing persons that, they had a list that the Kansas Department was trying to clear so that they had accountability within their campground.
Mark Majors is the rescue team manager, the specialist for USAR here in Lincoln.
This is a new concept with FEMA, the water operations, and what we tested down in Kansas was also a new concept of trying to utilize our boat teams and our boat equipment to transport back and forth to simulate some type of situation where we needed search and rescue, to actually search areas, in this case campgrounds, where we had no roads to access, to drive up and to drop rescue teams off. The other part of this that we also tested was we had Chinook helicopters that actually brought the team over. So we did a pre-stage of some of our equipment to really simulate an isolated water operations search and rescue type of scenario. The teams offloaded from the helicopters, we put them in our boats, and they actually loaded up all of our equipment and everything that they needed and rescue teams, and they went out and they dispersed through the lake and accessed all of the campgrounds that we wanted searched from the water. So what we were basically testing them and trying to get a good feel of what we needed to work additionally on was how do we transport rescue teams, how do we transport search teams, how do we get areas searched from water only, how do we transport the victims or people back to a collection point, and the other thing we have to take care of is also pets and animals. People in Katrina would not leave. There was numerous people that wouldn't leave without their pets or animals. We have the capabilities, and we need to transport those pets and animals just like we would any other victim.
LFR Battalion Chief Brad Thavanant is joining me on the show today. Explain logistics and how important it is to an exercise like this.
It's not unlike UPS, where you got to get the equipment there on time. They are our bread and butter folks, if you will. They manage all of the cache of equipment that goes with us. So they have it inventoried on the trucks. They know where it sits on the trucks, the loading plans to get through the scales, where you put anything from, they commonly refer to one very affectionately as Bed Bath & Beyond, is the semi-trailer they named, that carries all the tents, the sleeping bags, the cots, the sink and shower facilities, and that is kind of the BOO, our base of operations, but all the rescue tools come on. All the communication satellite equipment goes on, and they manage all of that in a load plan. They check it out to the folks that are using it in the field they provide those assets to whatever your mission specific task is. And so logistics folks are probably the hardest working individuals of any deployment or any exercise, because when it comes back, they might be cleaning it up, changing out blades, getting it ready to go right back out on another task, another mission. And that's just why we're there. And then why we utilize all that, when we come back, all of this equipment that goes with us must be returned to a state of readiness.
You have to account for every nut and bolt, don't you?
Every nut and bolt is accounted. This is a federal program, so we account for everything. We clean everything up. We fill out anything that might be damaged or just utilized or used up. They will procure it so that we are always at a state of constant readiness. So if we open up the tents and it rains on us, the tents have to be opened up and dried out here. Every box that got wet, dried out here. Every fuel that was used and all that kind of stuff, they will go through and inventory all of that, get it back loaded on there. And so when we get back from an exercise, logistics work, as they say, is never done. They're continuing to come in on their off days from the fire department to always make sure that that cache is in a constant state of readiness, ready to go. And so kudos, because they are the hardest working folks on the task force by far.
Bob Watton of Lincoln is the USAR specialist for logistics.
We have what we call base of operations, we call the BOO, to set up, which includes 11 tents. These are 19 by 35s, half of them, and then the other half are octagon type tents. In addition to that, we have computer systems we set up for our task force leaders, planning section. We have all sorts of things we provide for, say, the technical rescue. We also have a canine unit, so we provide kennels for them. We even bring dog food. They normally bring their own food, but we do have it available if needed. Once the missions begin, the rescue missions, we provide the equipment for them. So as you can see from bringing stuff down on semis and box trucks, it's not easy to get to. Some of these boxes are upwards of 400 or 500 pounds. So generally speaking, we utilize a forklift to offload our equipment. Once it is offloaded, we can put it into action fairly quick, but there's a little initial setup time with the logistics group. The logistics consists of 6 people. We have 2 managers and 4 logistics personnel, and we're also supported by a ground support team, which is normally a 10-member team, and the ground support drives, they're the commercial drivers, and they drive the big trucks down there, and they support us in the initial stages of the operations. Then it goes to, they usually go out in the field and work after a few days. Once we get down to our mission being complete, and we have to go to what we call the demobilization process, it's always a big event. We have all these tents to take down. We have to make sure they're not extremely wet, else it'll create mold and ruin the tents. We have a lot of equipment spread out. It's important that things get back in the right boxes. It can be upwards of a 5 to 6 hour event, just coordinating all the 80 team, all the members to take the equipment down, put it back in the right boxes, and get it back on the truck, loaded and strapped down. Most of our team's getting pretty good. We've been deployed numerous times in the last few years, which has helped the quickness of the demo process.
In the few minutes that we have left, describe your responsibilities at this exercise, Brad.
My specific role, I was an evaluator. I was one of the third-party evaluators I mentioned earlier, where I actually evaluated Missouri's state of readiness and how they perform there from a management standpoint. Every team has a task force leader that's in charge of managing the task force while they're on the field, providing with the equipment and stuff, but more importantly, going to the briefings, briefing the incident support team so they can brief the local jurisdiction on, are you meeting your objectives, getting the work done you need to get done, or do you need additional resources to be able to assist you with meeting your objectives that you do. So my specific job is I just kind of shadowed Missouri's task force leaders as they went to particular meetings, had meetings with their task force, with their management component of their task force, and started to divide up the specific workload to tasks. Were they meeting their needs, providing the proper paperwork and documentation to the federal officials on that side? Were they getting involved with meeting the local jurisdiction, the Salina folks that were there to participate? Were they having face-to-face meetings? Provide them feedback so they, as everyone knows, can provide feedback up through their city, and their citizenship wants to know what's going on. And so constant interaction with locals, and then constant interaction with your management cadre to get the people out in the field actually working. So
Finally, there are other members of LFR in USAR in addition to you. How does this make you guys and gals better firefighters for Lincoln, Nebraska?
that's something that you just cannot codify, because I think in so many ways the ability to work with specialized equipment, the ability to have that at a moment's notice if a parking garage, God forbid, happened collapse in the Haymarket area, those tools there, and the expert knowledge to go do it, the training that's involved to be able to go and spend a week that is at no cost to any of the city or taxpayers, that is involved from weeks to 2 weeks of specialized training to get that. Some of the critical thinking skills that you just don't see day to day, because you can't simulate large events like this at a fire training ground or law enforcement training ground or any other small training ground. You get something that you're invited to that's elaborate as this. Your management skills from events in the city, your critical thinking skills to just everyday calls, just exponentially raises your awareness, raises your thought process, raises your leadership skills, and it probably first and foremost just raises your area of technical expertise when it comes to mitigating problems and issues like this.
Appreciate your hard work, man.
Appreciate you having me.
Thanks,
Enjoy
Brad,
it.
very much. Brad Thavenet, Lincoln Fire and Rescue Battalion Chief. We're lucky to have people like Brad in this USAR team. As I said at the beginning of the show, we are very proud to know that one of the highest trained units in the country responding to disasters is based right here in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm Dale Johnson. Thanks for joining us, everybody, on Lincoln Fire and Rescue.